if you're a senior leader in the healthcare system and you've got a fixed budget, the question is, do you buy that medicine or that surgical device? Potential drugs that we give to patients in clinical trials never actually make it through. A drug gets a marketing authorization, the regulator says it's safe to use. You then have a 6-month or 9-month delay before the NHS is willing to pay for it, and that's very frustrating for patients. The threshold that NICE is willing to pay hasn't changed since 1999, and industry...
Not with even inflation?
Not with inflation, nope, it's exactly the same price. So industry does have an issue with that.
Welcome to the Visionary podcast, where we discuss science, medicine, physical health, and mental well-being. Dr. David Montgomery, we've had all sorts of guests here in the studio. We had longevity experts, dermatologists, GPs, all sorts, and people usually understood what they did. When people ask you, what do you actually do? How would you respond?
Great question. I'm a pharmaceutical physician, and what that means is I work for a pharmaceutical company, a drug company. And I think the purpose of drug companies is to develop medicines, and then people often forget the next bit, actually make them available to patients. So I work in a function called medical affairs, and my role really is to take medicines that have been developed by my company and take them through the commercialization process, so make them available to patients. That involves ensuring that the NHS is willing to pay for them. It involves working with the healthcare system to ensure that people are able to prescribe them, that we're able to the manufacturing process, all these other elements of it that sit between making a medicine and a patient at home taking a medicine for the disease.
Yeah, that's a very beautifully humane way to simplify a very complex role. You've had a remarkable journey from starting as a surgeon to now leading innovation in pharmaceutical medicine. You've worked in the NHS, Pharma, charities, policy making. Is there a thread that ties all these sectors together for you?
There are a number of threads for me. So, and I think I probably am quite unusual. I wouldn't say I'm unique, but I'm probably unusual. So one thing that's really tied my career together has been oncology. So everything I've ever done has been related to cancer. And actually, even more serendipitously, mostly breast cancer. So right the way through my career, there has been breast cancer as a fairly common theme. My wife, incidentally, is a consultant breast surgeon as well. So we have a sort of family interest in breast cancer. So every role I've done really has had that element of it. But actually, one of the things I think people forget is that life sciences is an ecosystem where we've got pharmaceutical companies, we've got charities, we've got politicians sitting in Westminster making laws, we've got companies developing drugs, we've got companies developing apps and diagnostics, we've got people making x-ray machines, and none of these organizations do this in isolation. Ultimately, we're all doing something that contributes to improving the healthcare of patients, and in lots of these commercial entities, improving the financial situation of the country.
I shared with you over the phone that I have a friend whose job is to decide whether a medication should be bought by the NHS and eventually to be delivered to patients or not. She sits on a panel with a number of people, which is never helpful, to decide whether it's worth it to buy this medication or not. It's not the argument whether the medication works or not, because this is for granted. Yeah, it should have great potential, but is it worth it? Is it good value to buy this very expensive drug to benefit tiny number of people? Now, it seems that there is an inherent tension between the NHS trying to be efficient and pharma companies trying to make money. Is real partnership here doable?
Let me step back a little bit, because it probably is worth just clarifying for your audience. What you've said is correct. There are a number of hurdles that we need to get through. So, and I think within the industry, we often think about proving that a medicine works for a condition. So what we typically do with clinical trials, if you get invited to be part of a clinical trial, we collect evidence to show how well a medicine works in any given disease area. And then there is a very rigorous regulatory process where, and in the UK, we have one body which does that called the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, and they make a very strong determination of the clinical effectiveness, the safety and effectiveness of a medicine. But of course, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story then is, does the NHS want to pay for this drug? Is it sufficiently beneficial at the price that
sufficiently beneficial?
Yeah, is it making enough of a difference relative to what it's going to cost? Okay. Because the healthcare system has a fixed budget and it has to buy things, and it can't buy everything. And so if you're a senior leader in the healthcare system and you've got a fixed budget, the question is, do you buy that medicine or that surgical device or that extra member of staff? What is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of overall population health? Quite often we get into important questions about our own health and our own diseases, but the reality is we've not got a private insurance system. So in a situation like the NHS, we've really got to make sure that we're using our money to treat the biggest number of patients in the most efficient way possible.
But what is the downside of this? That certain diseases, like new treatments for cancer, for example, or rare diseases, those patients might miss out on new medications. Is this a downside? Is this what we're risking here?
Yeah, potentially. And I think that is one of the great challenges. So I've set the scene a little bit there, but let me go back to answer the question you actually asked, which was, it's expensive developing medicines. Probably $1.5 billion to develop every medicine.
Who pays for this mostly?
Investors and shareholders, typically, okay. And revenue, of course. So money being given by governments to buy those medicines. And there are some inefficiencies in the system. Not all medicines succeed. So most medicines, most potential drugs that we give to patients in clinical trials never actually make it through. They don't work as we think they will, or they have too many side effects. And so
that's an easy argument, really. If they don't work, they don't work.
Sure, but all of these, there are development costs associated. So pharmaceutical companies spend quite a lot of money developing medicines and have to recoup that investment. And I think that's a very live argument just now, as you've probably seen in the press. There's this very live discussion in America. The Americans believe they pay too much for medicines relative to the rest of the world. The pharmaceutical industry, I think, believes that the NHS gets an extremely good deal.
They NHS probably do.
Has been excellent at driving discounts from the pharmaceutical industry. And I think there's a tension there. But again, I talk about this from a system perspective because I think this is really important. Companies employ staff and invest in countries.
And they need to be sustainable.
Right? So it needs to be sustainable. And so I think it is feasible, but I think it's difficult to do it just from the lens of the cost effectiveness analysis. If you think about the committees which are making decisions about whether this individual medicine is good value for money or not, I think governments need to sit back and think, how much do we want to be spending on medicines? How much do we feel that we need to spend in order to attract the investment from the pharmaceutical companies? Because these partnerships are more complex than just a simple transaction, a simple, I'll sell you a medicine, you buy a medicine. We do development, we do clinical trials in the UK, we do all of these other things. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that.
Yeah, so a real partnership is possible when both sides focus on outcomes. Mm-hmm. This is what you're telling me, not just like winning arguments or acquiring territory kind of thing. Well, again, at the risk of sounding unrealistic and naive, we're supposed to be a rich country, right? Why do we need to restore to the logic, or that logic of value argument of cost?
The British government has done a really good job of keeping costs down within the pharmaceutical budgets, within the drug budget. They are very efficient at medicines for a certain period of time, relatively short period of time, have a patent. They're branded medicines, and they typically are more expensive. But eventually that patent protection runs out, and it allows other companies to copy that medicine and introduce cheap versions of the same medicine.
Is that the branded stuff and the generic
generics.
stuff?
Yeah, those are generics.
Are generic stuff medications usually as effective as a branded?
Absolutely they are. And there is a regulatory process to make sure they are as well. And the government is very good at generic substitution. So at the point of medicines going off patent, the government really does quite quickly and effectively, the NHS.
So the NHS itself is the one commissioning the generic stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, but this means that pharma is losing out.
Yeah,
after all the developments and research.
It means that you get a short period of time at these. We talk about high prices, but you get a short period of time that you're as an innovator to recoup that investment. If you're a vacuum manufacturer and you patent something, then you own that patent forever, right?
If you have a new drug or innovation that you put the development and research into it, you're not going to have patent on it forever.
That's right. So that's not the truth. That's exactly so. So in lots of industries, you get to keep your intellectual property forever, right?
Yes.
Whereas in the pharmaceutical industry, that's not true.
Okay.
Government's been very good at keeping costs down through taxation system, through NICE, do a very good job of negotiating cost as well, negotiating price as well.
Hi, I'm Hala, your host today. If you're enjoying what you see, please hit that lovely subscribe button. It will mean a lot to us. Or maybe a small podcast now, but with your support, we can build this channel together, one step at a time. Thank you so much for being part of it.
How is that done usually? How can we make medicines and new treatments affordable for the NHS? Is it a matter of negotiations with pharmaceutical companies? Is there more nuance to this?
So the government in the UK has, I think, 3 really key mechanisms for keeping prices down within medicines. And some of those are more controversial than others. The NHS is very, very good at substituting branded medicines for generic medicines and often cheaper medicines at the end of life cycle. At the beginning of the life cycle, the healthcare system in the UK, there's an organisation called NICE in England, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which assesses every medicine for cost effectiveness. So it looks at the benefits that the medicine brings and it looks at the cost of the medicine. And I'm not going to get into great technical details about how it does that, but there's a consistent way that it does that. And they make a decision about how much they were willing to pay for the benefits of that medicine. And they can do that consistently across all drugs. The industry NICE was introduced in 1999 and had a threshold that they were willing to pay a certain amount of money for a certain amount of benefit.
No matter what the illness or the condition.
No matter what the illness or the condition, exactly. They've got a consistent way of measuring benefit that is consistent across all illnesses. The threshold that NICE is willing to pay hasn't changed since 1999. And industry...
Not with even inflation?
Not with inflation. Nope, it's exactly the same price. So industry does have an issue with that. In therapy areas where there's been constant evolution, constant innovation, then there has been inflation as a consequence of, each medicine that's a little bit better than the next means we're not exactly comparing it to 1999 prices. But areas where there's been much less innovation, if you've got very cheap medicines because nothing's happened and they've all gone off patent, and then you try and bring some real innovation in, it's very difficult to show cost effectiveness against a very cheap medicine. And then the third thing the government has is a tax system clawback. So at a system level within the healthcare industry and government negotiate every 5 years a settlement, an agreement on how much the industry, how much the government is willing to spend on medicines, essentially. I'm simplifying it quite significantly. But the total medicines bill is therefore capped. And if it goes above a certain spend, then government gets a clawback. And at the moment, the clawback is very high.
Clawback.
Into the 20%. Yeah. So industry has to pay money back from its profits to the government.
The pharmaceutical companies pay back
into government.
And this is an agreement that the NHS has with all pharmaceutical
companies. Government has with the pharmaceutical industry, yes.
And this is a requirement.
Negotiated through the trade body. Everyone signs up to it. And it covers all branded medicines and unbranded medicines are different deals. And so the healthcare system has lots of levers for keeping medicine prices down. And this is a really live debate at the moment. Industry is very much of the view that the thresholds for cost effectiveness are too low, that the amount of money that we pay back from profits, i.e. the amount of tax that companies are paying is too high, And government doesn't think that.
Oh, of course not.
Because we have a challenging economic situation in the UK. We've slightly run out of money. We're about to have a budget, and Rachel Reeves is trying to work out which taxes she puts up because we've got a challenging financial situation. And so that's a very interesting discussion because, of course, in recent weeks and months, companies have been concerned about how much investment they're willing to make into the UK in the face of government unwillingness to pay for medicines.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting, a very complicated situation. I'm not bothered about how much, as me, Hala, just a patient, I'm not bothered about how much pharmaceutical companies make as profit. I'm definitely bothered about the research and development of new products, of whatever enhancing the medications already on the market, and who does that? Pharmaceutical companies. So they obviously need the money to channel funds into new treatments. That's what I'm thinking. If we take money from their profit, is this false economy to paying so cheaply? I mean, yeah, well, we need affordable drugs, but is it false economy, do you think, that we negotiate the best deal over the expense of product development down the line in the future?
I think it's a really good question. I think industry would argue that it is, and I think it's expensive, long, time-consuming, difficult to make medicines. And I think companies pharmaceutical companies will give money back to investors, of course. But of course, who are investors? Investors are often you and I with our pensions. So this isn't nameless, faceless corporate entities. Everyone benefits if the companies in our stock exchanges do well. Everyone benefits as a consequence of that, because we all have pensions, we all have investments, we all have all these other things. So yeah, I think there's a real tension there. I mean, I'm now not in the pharmaceutical. I no longer work for a drug company. I'm an independent pharmaceutical physician, so I can step away from the argument a little bit and have my own views and opinions on it. But I think at the moment the balance feels to me wrong. It feels like the healthcare system, the government, and the pharmaceutical industry are more further apart than they have been for a long time in terms of seeing the value of medicines. I think that's certainly what the industry bodies would say. And in my career, I've sat on many of these committees as well. I've sat on the Scottish Medicines Consortium, which is the body in Scotland that makes cost effectiveness decisions, and I've been part of that thinking. I was a panelist on the Cancer Drugs Fund from 2012 to 2015, and that was the body who made decisions about whether we funded cancer medicines. So I've been involved in these discussions at a very high level for a long time, and it just feels just now the most negative it's been for a long time. It's always been a challenge, there's always been a tension, but just now it just feels the most negative it's been.
You've also spoken about the hurdles a new drug faces before it's approved by the NHS. Mm-hmm. What's fair and what's frustrating about this process when a new drug is introduced to the market? It is a long process, isn't it?
This is one area which I think Britain has been getting really good at. So yes, it is a long process. Pharmaceutical innovation, healthcare innovation, it's really important to get it right. And we've seen historically situations where we haven't got it right. The most famous one would be thalidomide, for example, where a medicine was introduced to counter morning sickness, probably didn't have sufficient evidence base for use in pregnant women, and caused birth defects in lots and lots of children. So lots of children were born with arm and particularly upper limb abnormalities.
When was that?
Oh goodness, you've asked me an interesting question. In the late 50s, early 60s, I think. I can't remember exactly when thalidomide was.
Do we have data on what exactly happened? Was it short clinical trials or something?
We do know what happened. It's very complicated, but the drug had an effect on how blood vessels developed, and as a consequence, it had an effect on how limbs developed, how arms and legs developed. So there are examples in the far history of having insufficient evidence, and I think regulators have gotten very good at getting that balance right. Regulators and drug companies have worked together very closely. I think we have a risk proportionate approach to regulation. So if you're going to produce a medicine that treats headache in pregnant women, headache, not a dreadfully serious disease, it won't kill you,
thinking, yeah.
and you're pregnant with a child, so the risks of harm are much higher. So the evidence you would need for that medicine and that indication, we think about it slightly differently than we think about it in end-of-life cancer. So if someone's dying of cancer and a medicine shows a potentially strong effect on reducing the risk of dying, then clearly we will find ways of getting that to patients in a safe and controlled way more quickly.
It's a calculated risk, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think governments, I think regulators have been brilliant at that. We are starting to see the medicines regulated in the UK since Brexit become very innovative. I think they're doing some really clever things. There's a new chief executive, Lawrence Talon, who I think's got incredible energy and is doing some really brilliant stuff. One of the really exciting things that they're doing is they're now partnering with NICE. And it's an early stage in the process, but they are very much looking to create a process where you can go through both the regulatory steps and the market access, the reimbursement, the cost effectiveness steps in parallel. And what's really frustrating in the UK is that a drug gets a marketing authorization, the regulator says it's safe to use, and you then have a 6-month or 9-month delay before the NHS is willing to pay for it. And that's very frustrating for patients.
And is it NICE who decides this?
Yeah, NICE in England and Wales and the SMC in Scotland. NICE and the regulator are now working much more closely together to make those decisions on the same day. That's the target. They're really pushing.
On the same day might be a little push.
With coordination, they can do it. That's certainly the ambition, and I think that's really exciting. I think that would really improve how quickly we get these innovations through. The frustration for me, you asked about what's going well. I think what's going well is the regulators and others are really looking to speed this up as quickly as we can. I think we're doing amazing work there. The frustration is that once it's reimbursed, we still don't see medicines being rolled out in the healthcare system as quickly, universally as quickly as they could. So some doctors, some hospitals, some institutions start prescribing immediately. Others continue to use existing medicines for quite a long time. And so the uptake curve is quite slow. I think we need to get better at saying, right, this medicine's been shown to be effective. We've negotiated a price that we consider to be cost effective. Let's start using it.
What happens in the middle? Is it bureaucracy?
I think it's more of a clinical decision making. I think it's keeping up with innovation. I don't batter the healthcare system because it's full of extraordinarily busy people with extraordinarily difficult jobs, and keeping up with every innovation and knowing what's going on all the time. If you're a general practitioner, how on earth do you keep up with every new medicine and the evidence base for it? I think that's very, very challenging. And so the question for me is, how do we help and support the uptake of innovation, knowing that the healthcare system is incredibly busy, it's stretched, it's difficult. People want to do the best for the patients. That is, in all the roles I've ever done, you asked me about my sort of driving motivation. The one thing I see throughout the healthcare system is professionals who want to do the best for their patients. That's really consistent for me, wherever I see it. But it's tricky keeping up to date sometimes.
Yeah, but is there a space in which we could maybe modernize how the NHS decides which medication is worth it? There is a space of improvement.
Yeah, we do that to an extent. I think again, we're beginning to think about that more carefully. Some therapeutic areas, some disease areas do it better than others.
Give us examples, please. Examples. Like I'm thinking in terms of new treatments, new medications, I'm always thinking of rare diseases, cancer. By default, if it's new, there is a certain degree of innovation and investment behind it. So it's never an easy decision to replace old medications in the first place.
I think that's right. So I think, and it's complicated by the fact that clinical trials are done one drug against another. So you know your medicine is better than the drug you tried it against, but there may be other options, there may be other treatments, there may be different lines of treatment. Certainly in cancer, we don't typically give someone one drug. We give them a drug until it stops working, and then we give them another medicine until it stops working, and then we give them another medicine until it stops working. And how you sequence those is often becomes, as you develop more and more evidence, it becomes more and more challenging to work out the best sequence for giving medicines, in which drugs you should give sooner in the journey versus later.
When you say
cancer has
stops working, what does that mean, please?
So if someone's got a cancer and it's not curable, it's not been removed by surgery, we give medicines to shrink it or stop it growing, but eventually those medicines stop and the cancer starts to grow again, and we'll swap the medicine in. In cancer, we've been very good at that. There are lots of organisations which look at all of the evidence and try and provide guidance to doctors about how to use the different treatments and which order to use them in. I think we've been very good at that in some areas. I think in other areas it's been less good. Again, typically in primary care, in general practice, it's sometimes harder for doctors to get that evidence base and to understand which medicines they should be using when.